This is Dom Bettinelli, the CEO of SQPN, with a brief but very important message. For more than a decade, SQPN has produced the Catholic faith and pop culture podcasts that you love. We're a nonprofit organization, so it's only your generosity that lets us carry out our mission. We haven't run a fundraiser in 2 years, and that's why we need to ask for your help right now. Please make a pledge of whatever amount you can afford to help us continue providing your favorite podcasts, as well as exciting new ones we have planned. To make your pledge and find out about the free thank you gifts we'd like to send you, visit sqpn.com/give. That's sqpn.com/give. Thank you for your generosity. May we hear from you today? You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek episode number 25.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the first Star Trek Voyager episode, Caretaker. And joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Aiken. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Corey Stika. Hi, Father Corey.
How's it going?
So this is the first episode of Star Trek Voyager. It aired January 16th, 1995. It was a two-parter. It kind of falls into the pattern that we've seen of Star Trek series
in the
90s, where there's a handoff from the previous series. We've got a character shows up from the previous one, and there's some overflow into the new thing. There's a lot of there's a lot in this episode. There's a lot of behind the scenes drama that went into the making of this series. We had just finished the
only they could have transitioned that on screen.
Well, right? That might have been part of the problem. So we just finished the long run of Star Trek Next Generation. It's transitioning to movies, and Deep Space Nine is ongoing. It's hit its stride at this point, and we've got this new series. And what do we do with it? Do we do just another starship exploring like we did with the original series or Next Gen, or do we do something new? And so they decided we needed to do something new. We need to have, they came up with the starship flung into the far reaches of the galaxy, far from home, making its way home.
And that wasn't unreasonable. You do need to do something to differentiate this from Next Gen.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there had been such a gap between the original series and Next Gen that you could say, okay, guess what? We're going to explore the galaxy again on our new ship. And,
Right.
and nobody would have said, oh, we've seen that premise before. Actually, a lot of people did say that, but, but they got over it quickly. So with Next Gen being such a fresh memory, and even then going on to do movies, you needed this spinoff series to do something different. And DS9 did the obvious thing of let's use a space station instead of a spaceship. So if we've already played the space station card, or are currently playing it, we need to do something with the ship, but how can we make it different? Let's do Lost in Space. That's reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Right. And they amp up the drama as much as they can by throwing in this conflict between the Maquis, who are introduced in Deep Space Nine, and Starfleet, and throwing these two crews together, which is supposed to create lots of conflict, but eventually doesn't. I mean, we kind of talked about all this in our overview of Voyager, so I don't want to spend too much time on that.
Yeah. So in this episode, we start with like opening text, which I guess we also saw in at least
DS9.
briefly in
DS9 had it.
Yeah.
And then we have a very Star Wars like opening with the big Cardassian ship versus the small Maquis ship.
I noticed the same thing.
and then we meet Tuvok the Liar. It's like, wow, this is the most lyingest Vulcan ever.
Undercover Vulcan.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed is the cabin of that Maquis shuttle just happened to look exactly like the set for the DS9 runabout.
Yes, just a little redressed. Yes. One of the things that they mentioned was so due to the cost of building Voyager's bridge and converting the old next gen sets, then they had to reshoot the scenes that they'd already shot with Genevieve Bujold for Janeway.
It was awful.
Yes, and she had to be replaced early on in production. They had to bring in Kate Mulgrew and they reshoot all that.
It was great,
but they had to reshoot her stuff again because she has her when she has her hair down, it's kind of fine, and it looked all weird in all the various shots, like you could see light through it. So that's why she has
dailies.
Yes, and that's why they had to reshoot it with her in this updo that she has early on. That bulbous bun,
which I'm glad they got rid of eventually because it made her look really stern and it wasn't an attractive look at all.
Right. And then they had very ambitious special effects scenes and in a substantial amount of location filming. This episode's final budget made it the most expensive television episode in Star Trek history. And when you adjust for inflation, still, it's even more. And when you adjust for inflation, it's even more expensive than Wrath of Khan, which many people say was the best Star Trek movie. Right. So that's a pretty substantial budget for this. So it's very interesting just to talk about in this sense of this. It's what they essentially made was a movie out of this pilot here, and I just wish it'd come out more movie like. So so what do we have? We have the Maquis. They get very much developed in Voyager, and we have the sense in this of former Starfleet, sort of rebellious. They don't quite fit in. Some of them are mercenaries. Some are in it for principle. We kind of get this. They're like rebels and revolutionaries. And we get that early on in this. We can kind of divide this episode into two parts. We have the first part, which really involves the caretaker.
Well, they kind of did divide it into two parts, each 45 minutes long.
Right, exactly. Right. And then we have a second screenplay story involving the Ocampa, which still has the caretaker involved, but we sort of very consciously shift from one to the other in this. We have our various characters who are different early on. Chakotay, he's got his indeterminate Western Hemisphere Native American background of some sort, which we get references to. They're very conscious of presenting him as a Native American of some sort.
But what they're very unconscious of is the acceptability of having Tom Paris doing all these American Indian slurs at him in the 24th century.
Exactly.
I mean, I thought racism was a thing of the past. Come on, guys.
Yeah. Well, was it at one point the wrong kind of Indian? I think it was Chakotay's response.
Yeah, it was the idea that if I save your life, you've got a life debt to me, and that's wrong tribe.
Yeah. Well, maybe all that PC stuff is gone in the 24th century, and we can take a joke about things. Maybe that we'll see.
It didn't feel like he was joking.
Well, because what was it? Apparently, that at the academy they teach racism against Ferengi, as we see with poor Harry Kim, who's just a babe in the woods when he gets to Deep Space Nine, and Quark tries to cheat him, and.
That was a funny scene.
Yes, that was
clever. That was pretty good.
I found it very interesting that the character they chose, the token character of the old series, sending off the new series, is Quark, not anyone from Starfleet, nothing like that. Instead of, because with Deep Space Nine, it was very much, very clearly for a reason, Picard handing off to Sisko. It was very dramatic and tense, and this was very lighthearted and very different feel to it. So I thought that was an interesting difference.
It may have had to do with actor availability. It may have also had to do with if we're trying to introduce Harry Kim, because they're staging the actors as they introduce them, and they're not giving them to us all at once, so we don't have information overload. So it's like, okay, we need a way to introduce Harry Kim. Do we have anything for him? Well, where would an ensign plausibly be at the beginning of this story? He'd be in a bar, and that would make Quark logical.
He's, his first time out in the deep space. He's checking out the place, and he, the first time the fresh out of the academy sailor shows up in a port bar, someone's going to try to cheat him. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah. I mean, it really is a reasonable way of doing it. And it's clever because by this time, Quark had developed into a beloved character on DS9.
Right, he was the breakout character. Yeah,
yeah, and it also gives us a character moment for Tom Paris, who is sort of a bad guy, but with a heart of gold, and our Starfleet people that we're supposed to really respect and idolize. That's Starfleet. They don't like Tom Paris, so there's automatically like, are we not supposed to like this guy? Because
I don't think he does really have a heart of gold in this episode. I think he has a heart of normalness, but
he
also
saves
this bad boy overlay.
He does save Harry from being cheated and sort of befriends him a little bit. So there's a little, Harry's got the lost puppy thing that he got. So let's talk about Tom first. We had mentioned in the overview that Tom Paris was not supposed to be the character. It was supposed to be, was it Nick Locarno from the Next Generation episode, The First Duty? And he was the washed out of the academy, and we were supposed to understand that he went to go with the Maquis. And for whatever,
why did they change that? That would have been great.
Yeah, for whatever reason, I think they wanted to maybe shed the baggage or add that Nick's dad was an admiral or something. I don't know. It was very interesting that they made the change. It probably says something somewhere out there on the net that explains it. And if anyone knows it, we'd welcome the feedback at trek@sqpn.com.
My guess would be they wanted to give him the admiral dad, and they couldn't have plausibly said, oh, and by the way, Nick Locarno's dad was an admiral who we never saw in that episode.
Right. Like if his dad was an admiral, he would have showed up at the hearings and that sort of thing. I do notice that the enlightened future version of incarceration still includes being transported to the Antipodes, sent to a penal colony in New Zealand.
But not for life.
But not for life, right.
And probably a lot more comfortable than it was when Australia was a penal colony.
Yeah, I'm going to guess that. We have it. So he's recruited to betray his old colleagues by guiding the Voyager through the Badlands to where they're at. Although he doesn't do a whole lot of guiding, by the way, once they get there.
Yeah.
He's just sort of standing there, not doing much while they get hammered by this displacement wave.
And at that point, we get to meet the Doctor. Now that the physical Doctor ends up dying,
who, by the way, was very unpleasant. The original Doctor was very unpleasant.
Yeah, he was not likable. In fact, much of the crew that gets killed in that first episode, the first officer, the helmsman, they were all kind of, no great loss. I mean, none of them were all that likable.
Which is what you'd want to do from a certain point. Either we don't want to know these people at all, or we certainly don't want the audience becoming attached to them if we're about to kill them off.
Right, exactly.
I love the Doctor's initial lines when he shows up. Please state the nature of the medical emergency. Great line. Also, tricorder, and then someone hands him a tricorder. Medical tricorder.
Right. Yeah. Right. Where's the nurse? Where's the Well, that's the funny thing is when an emergency medical hologram is activated, it's probably because the regular medical staff is not available. So for him to be to not realize that,
well, it could be. I mean, he could assume the doctor is unavailable, but nurses might be more plentiful.
Right. That's possible, I suppose. And
by the way, I don't know if I may have mentioned this in our overview of this, but last year or earlier this year, I was at a social occasion where someone went into cardiac arrest, and everybody who was there instantly just snapped into place and started doing things to save this guy's life, and we did. And it was my job to talk to 911, and other people were giving CPR while I ran and got the defibrillator that was at the facility and so forth. And they have these amazing, it was kind of like an EMH. We had the defibrillators they have now will talk you through the CPR process. Mm-hmm. They instruct you on how to place the pads for an EKG. They tell you to get clear. They'll tell you, it'll start the shocking procedure. It'll say, now give breath, and to tell you when to breathe into the person's lungs. And so that was kind of an interesting experience. But what I found and very dramatic experience, what I found disheartening, though, was talking to 911, because I assumed, I dial 911 and I assume I'm going to get the equivalent of please state the nature of the emergency.
Right.
And I didn't. And it's like, come on, fiction is more, let's get things moving than this is.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I thought that real life 911 could take a tip from Voyager. And that's probably the nicest thing I'll ever say about Voyager.
Well, let's talk about some of the other aspects of this episode. One, I felt it was very odd to see Voyager as it was supposed to be, whole, still in the Alpha Quadrant, with the dining room being with there's no kitchen in the dining room, people doing the jobs that they're supposed to be doing. It's not makeshift at all. I thought it was a very interesting experience to see that again. Given
the contrast of what they developed the ship and the crew into versus what it was originally.
Right. And I found Janeway to be very stiff. I mean, she's kind of stiff throughout the series, but very stiff in the beginning. But perhaps that's because Kate Mulgrew was a late addition to the cast.
Well, and there's always been that aspect of the, just as, we talk about with Doctor Who at a regeneration, where they're growing into their character. Well, there's always been that aspect in Star Trek. Look at Picard at the beginning of Next Gen. He was a jerk. Yeah. He was not liked, but again, he became one of the more beloved characters of that series.
Although he never got unstiff.
No, he just became more beloved.
And Avery Brooks in DS9, he was always very stiff too. I mean, except with his underlings, not with his son or his girlfriend, but with his underlings, he was always strict.
Right, and actually, well, he loosened up. I mean, there were times when he would Jadzia and
Jadzia, yeah.
So there was we were supposed to get some humanizing moments with Janeway and her boyfriend and their dog and that sort of stuff, but it felt a little stiff. And in fact, that whole scene where Harry's like, calls her sir, and then she says, I know others captains are okay with sir, but don't call me sir. Says ma'am, and then she says, well, it's okay, and he says, yes, captain. Well, that in crunch time. And then she's like, it's not crunch time yet. It's like, there is protocol. It's not just your preference, lady. this is how things are done to help things run properly. And so you have yes and sir, because you not just yes, but yes, sir, because it conveys, I understand and I will carry it out. Not, I mean, Father Corey, you served in the military. You understand a little bit of that.
Well, and I mean, admittedly in the Air Force, we would do sir or ma'am.
Right.
At least for officers. Now, like if I'm talking to another enlisted, I might, say airman so-and-so or sergeant so-and-so.
Right.
But for officers, it was always yes, sir, yes, ma'am.
But not just yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It was, and I mean, it really depended too. Yeah. It more familiar. You would say like, yes, captain, or yes, lieutenant or whatever, you know, but to have it dressed down like that, most officers wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
I think that's really just because they previously established in Star Trek that by the 23rd century, you had female officers being called sir, like Mr. Savick.
Right.
And they didn't want to put Janeway in that role. They wanted her to be able to be more feminine and be okay with ma'am, which would sound more natural to the ears of the ongoing audience.
Right.
And so that, I think that was just an excuse to get the ma'am sir issue resolved for the sake of the audience.
Right.
Good. So we have this the premise is that this caretaker being is looking for a mate to create a progeny that will continue its mission to care and watch over the Ocampa.
I've got to think there's a better way to date than randomly seizing ships from across the galaxy and hoping one of them is your mate.
Delta Quadrant Tinder.
Yeah, it's like, come on, isn't there an
Swipe
app
left.
you guys can use?
Swipe left. No kidding. That's some random dating. The Maquis end up over there, and then the Voyager ends up over there, and they end up in this illusion, this weird illusion, which I'm not sure what the point was. Is why doesn't the caretaker just transport them over there in their like unconscious state and test them? Like, what was the point of this illusion?
Yeah, I know, and it's also plays into. I mean, you have this disorienting environment where it's like maybe 19th century America, and we're on a farm and people are playing banjos and starting to dance, and this is meant to be creepy, and it's like, guys, this is going to turn Deliverance on us. This is a standard anti-Southern American Hollywood trope where the Southerners end up getting portrayed as menacing in some way.
Right. The pitchforks come out. Literally.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was so weird. And then, but when the caretaker is eventually confronted with, the kidnapping of people and dragging them away from their part of the galaxy, he says it was necessary. And it's interesting that the caretaker's ethics are essentially this alien being is situational. It's very much subjective.
Right.
I need it. It's utilitarian. I needed you. I used you, and I'm discarding you. And it's very interesting.
Yeah, except he's got this weird, other than his mating prime directive, he's also got this, I did something to the Ocampans in the past, and therefore I owe them big time. That trumps anything I might do to anybody else.
Yeah, well, you did something bad to us.
Yeah.
Send us back.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, but you're not part of a whole planet. You're just a little starship.
Right.
Yeah. By the way, speaking of the Ocampans, I had in my notes, once Janeway starts interacting with them, it's like, wait, we're really at Jim Kirk levels of prime directive violation right now. I mean, shouldn't you be calling an ethics committee to talk about how you're interacting with this culture?
Yeah, I think Next Gen, Voyager throws out the prime directive early on, doesn't it? In fact,
throws it out, but it does come up. Every once in a while,
Janeway
they throw it out there.
She does get confronted. To their credit, they do confront her with her violations of the prime directive later on in seasons. I find it's interesting. The original Ocampa were much more telepathic than Kes ever was. I mean, she eventually becomes a telepathic super being later on for some reason. But and she does just demonstrate some telepathic abilities at times. But in this episode, telepathy appears to be a primary means of communication among them,
right?
Which is interesting. So that was a little different. We have Janeway and Tuvok discussing the Ocampa planet. They say it's an M class with an atmosphere, but has no moisture at all and no nucleogenic particles in the atmosphere, which means no rain. And I'm like,
that's nonsense.
Nucleogenesis is a real thing, has nothing to do with the atmosphere.
Yeah, it's a nuclear reaction. It's particles that are produced from a nuclear reaction, such as a nuclear bomb or inside of a star.
Or in the Earthbound case, it's the natural decay of uranium in the ground. It's natural radiation.
It has nothing to do with rainfall.
That's what causes rain, don't you know?
Apparently.
Also, the idea of no moisture is clearly hyperbole. There couldn't be a biosphere if there was no moisture.
Well, and in fact, not just on this planet, but supposedly there's no water anywhere within range of the Kazon or Neelix's vessel.
This is ridiculous because it's like V, where the aliens wanted water or something,
right?
Because hydrogen and oxygen are two of the most common elements in the universe.
Right.
All you got to do is bring them together.
Nowhere. I mean, there are no comets that are ice balls. There are nothing. Nothing that can produce water. Nothing.
Well, it's like, what is this technology you have to produce water? It's called. I mean, we have it in the 20th century. You have spaceships that can travel between planets. Like, how can you not be able to make water? Yeah, it doesn't make sense. I mean, because frankly, how could you survive without water at the level that they demonstrate? I mean, yes, we have civilizations on Earth who live in desert-like areas that have to harvest water from unusual sources, but usually they are small civilizations with very very little technology.
They don't have spaceships.
Right. It's very it's hard to buy, and that was unfortunate.
One of the first things you do as you start to develop technology is figure out how to get reliable sources of water, even if it means moving.
Well, in fact, water is a byproduct of early rocketry. Rockets, when they combine the hydrogen and the oxygen in our rocket engines, it actually produces water vapor. So yeah. One of the things I noticed with watching this now is how much the Caretaker story is like the story of Ego in Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Did either of you see that movie?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So in that one, Kurt Russell is this planet creature who is searching for a mate to produce progeny and discarding those that are unworthy or that don't measure up or aren't fitting. So it's I thought it was kind of, but I felt like maybe James Gunn was lifting a little bit from a Voyager. I thought that was interesting. Cass comes off as a more interesting character here, in my view, than she does in the rest of Voyager in many ways. I think she only goes downhill.
Bit more sympathetic here, and I think that was part of the problem that eventually led her to be replaced by the eye candy. I mean, 709.
Yeah.
Well, if Seven was stronger than Cass ever proved to be, Cass became very much like the wide-eyed innocent, whereas she wasn't as much of in this episode.
Yeah, and that's part of the issue. I mean, the essence of drama is character conflict, and Cass just had no character conflict.
Yeah.
She had little flashes of it at times, but she was apparently saving it all up for becoming an angry super being that wanted to kill everybody.
Yeah, in an episode that made no sense, and we'll talk about that someday when we get to it.
Yeah,
exactly.
But in this episode, she's actually almost like Neelix's conscience, because Neelix is much more morally, much less of who he eventually becomes. I mean, he's a little more willing to do things and betray and underhand and sly.
He's the slimy wheeler dealer character.
Yeah, he's a lot less of that in the future. By the end of the episode, they've kind of settled into their new roles. And then we have the introduction of one of my least favorite of all villains in Star Trek, the Kazon. The
their wild haircut,
the bad hair people.
The racial bad hair day. Amazing. So I was unclear on why do the Kazon want to attack the Caretaker? Did either one of y'all have a good handle on that?
They wanted the technology, maybe.
That's the only thing I could think of was to get the power from the technology that he had in his space station to be able to the array to be able to conquer other people or whatever.
Yeah, I think they're kind of punching above their class. I mean, for something that can whisk starships 70,000 light years in a second, all he has to do is give your ship a little push and you're never going to see home again.
Well, I think they know at this point that the Caretaker is done. It's like the house is empty, which is why they're attacking, since he's no longer sending those energy blasts to the Ocampa.
Right.
But the thing that happens here at the end of this episode is sort of another thing that didn't get thought through, that undermines the entire premise of the series, which is Janeway, as in principle, we have to sacrifice our ability to get home to keep the
Ocampa.
Right, to keep the technology out of the hands of the Kazon, protect the Ocampa. So we're going to destroy the array. Like, hey, I have an idea. let's set a timed bomb.
That's what I was
that
thinking.
goes off just after we use the technology to send us home.
To be fair, they did say that when the Kazon ship crashed into the array, it destroyed or damaged the self-destruct stuff. Okay, let's lose that conceit that in this entire array, there's only one spot where the entire self-destruct mechanism exists. Okay, we'll use that conceit.
Right.
They couldn't have set some kind of timer on their little photon torpedo thingy so that they would have sat there and circled for like 5 minutes and then boom.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. This is like like, you could come up with a plausible technology explanation. I know it undermines the very premise of the series, which is that they're stuck in this. But what it shows to me is that they didn't think it out. They said, well, it's good enough. There's a hole there, but let's just move on.
I think it's even worse than that, because not only is there that problem, but you have all this buildup to Janeway's dramatic moral choice. Do we stay or do we go? And we stay to protect the Ocampa. And then what happens immediately after? Oh, let's just abandon the Ocampa and start heading home.
Right.
Exactly.
Leave them to their Kazon friends.
Well, I mean, I guess they assume that the Ocampa are safe underground now that
for 5 years,
except for the little holes that are everywhere. Right, for 5 years. I don't know what they're going to do in 5 years. Hopefully, they figure out how to take care of themselves in that time. So, as she says to the caretaker about the Ocampa, it's the challenge of surviving on their own that helps them to evolve, which actually, in a way, is her about the Voyager crew. This is what they're going to do, is they're going to have to survive on their own and evolve to make it home. And that's what happens in Voyager. So it's a bit, of a self, I'm trying to say it's the writer inserting a bit in there that has two meanings to it for our consumption. One of the things that also kind of came up for me was Chakotay defers to Janeway in everything,
really
right off
fast.
the bat. Like, he is a rebel. He has abandoned his standing in Starfleet to become a Maquis rebel, and she was hunting him down. And suddenly, now she makes all the decisions, and he just goes along with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. There are a number of additional logic problems like that. The caretaker and his mate are explorers from another galaxy, so you only sent 2 of them, and they don't have an effective way to communicate?
No. He said 2 of us were left behind. So there was more of them, and they were left there. But still, your species left 2 people away? Yeah, right.
Yeah. And also, B'Elanna is like telling, so with Voyager and the Maquis ship, talking about the Kazon ship, B'Elanna at one point says, neither of us has enough firepower to stop that ship. And so that's the pretext for getting the Maquis ship destroyed.
Right.
But then it doesn't seem like Voyager has a big problem here.
Because it doesn't have a ability to defend itself against Kazon?
Yeah, or I mean, that's
if one ship, of course, they kind of backtrack that too, because it went from, we don't have enough firepower to deal with this one big ship, to all of a sudden Voyager was the most powerful ship in the in that part of the galaxy, and later episodes.
No, they do. They don't actually abandon that point. It comes up in the first season, when they encounter the Kazon, that there are different sized Kazon ships, and some of the Kazon ships are big enough that they do represent a major threat to Voyager. So I think what they're saying here is the regular firepower isn't enough, so they ram the big Kazon ship with the Maquis vessel, which then causes it to crash into the caretaker array, and puts it out of commission. So now they just have the small Kazon ships to deal with, and that lets Voyager escape at this point. But yeah, I don't see that as a big hole in this in the logic, just because we do see them have to deal with the Kazon from that point of view, which is actually not a bad thing, that they aren't the most powerful anyway.
No, you wouldn't want them to be. Yeah. This is just a minor thing, but you know how, if you've ever seen the movie Forbidden Planet, where there's an ancient dead race called the Krell. And Walter Pidgeon explains, as a human scientist, he explains that no record of their physical form has survived, which is ridiculous. But you can get an idea of what they looked like based on the shapes of their doors. And he points to one of their doors, and it's like almost a pentagon. Or, you know, and so you can imagine someone fitting through that the way our bodies fit through our rectangular doors. Well, okay, so when we finally see the Caretaker without the cornpone turned sinister illusion, it's a big blob. Yep. And it's in this incredibly angular ship. I mean, what's going on with the blob designers?
I know. I mean, there were actual like beds and things. Did it have to create those in the thousands of years? Yeah, that was it didn't seem quite to fit. And apparently they take the Caretaker's body with them. Because as we see later on, it begins to vibrate in the presence of another of the same species. As they, so in general, it's like a lot of the other first episodes of the series for Star Trek, a bit of an uneven beginning.
So far the best. Of the 90s era Star Treks, 80s and 90s Star Treks, I think Deep Space Nine has the best of the beginnings we've seen so far.
Yeah, yes, I would agree with
I thought you were going to say this is the best of the Voyager episodes we've watched so far.
Well, that's true by definition.
Yeah.
There are some better ones.
Yes. I am more sanguine about Voyager than Jimmy is. But I did notice several instances of some kind of. And we did expend a number of photon torpedoes. So that so let's start the count now of the number of photon torpedoes that Voyager is carrying.
Do I recall in this one they said we only have 6 and then they used all 6? Or am I thinking of another scene in Star Trek?
The Maquis vessel had only 6.
Okay.
Yep.
But I think at some point I don't know if it was this one or one.
It's from the Deep Space Nine premiere.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That's right. That they only had 6. So I guess that's it on Voyage on Caretaker for us. I'll throw it out to the audience. Did you have anything particularly that you loved about it? Other things that we might have missed, plot points or behind the scenes clues to why it showed up the way it is. Why was Tom Paris replacing Nick Locarno, for instance? We'd love to hear from you. So send us a message. Go to sqpn.com /Trek or the SQPN Facebook page and leave us a comment on the show's episode there. You can leave us feedback there or send us an email to trek@sqpn.com. You can find links relevant to our discussion on our show notes at sqpn.com. And please, if you could like, share, retweet, and get the news out about our podcast, Secrets of Star Trek. There are lots of Star Trek fans out there, and there are other Star Trek podcasts, but we think ours is unique, so we have a unique voice that we need to share. If you're enjoying this, chances are your other Star Trek fans will too. But please share the podcast with them, and you can subscribe iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play, and even on YouTube at the SQPN YouTube channel. So we'll be back next time when we'll be discussing Star Trek Enterprise's first episode, Broken Bow. And until then, Father Corey Stika, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Yeah, thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Aiken, thank you as well.
Live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. This is Dom Bettinelli again. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast and that you'll help us keep producing the podcast you love. Thank you for your generosity. To make your pledge and find out about the free thank you gifts we'd like to send you, visit sqpn.com/give. That's sqpn.com/give.